Hello, students. This is the session of the politics of food about hot pockets and inequality. Let's get going. Okay, so the plan for today is to discuss the reading by Fielding Singh, the article A Taste of Inequality. And we're taking this article as a way to think about the demand side of nutritional inequality. In a previous course, we talked a little bit about the supply side of nutritional inequality. We read about how the history of how McDonald's franchises came to dominate many low-income, particularly African American neighborhoods in U.S. cities. Well, today we're looking at um, A Taste of Inequality, this article, and I'm gonna bring some more information, some more evidence to the course to allow us to think about this question of is this nutritional inequality due entirely to a lack of healthy options in low-income neighborhoods, or is there something else going on? Is there something on the side of preferences or demand? We're going to talk about this famous concept of food deserts, um, as the food desert hypothesis is the hypothesis behind, is the supply hypothesis. And we're going to end the class today with a workshop about field notes. A big part of this class has to do with ethnographic research, going into the field and taking notes, observing what you see, and then writing creatively or writing intelligently about the observations you make in the field. Just this week or last week, you've conducted um, an ethnographic observation of a McDonald's um, or another fast food establishment. That's your first opportunity to spend some time in the field and to do some ethnographic research. Uh, so I'd like to start by thinking about this opening question. How often should kids eat junk food, and what role should the government play in determining what kids eat? I'm sure each of you in your own families have had different ways of grappling with this question. Your parents have thought about this differently. Maybe you have differing views from your own parents. On the one hand, we may say, you know, kids shouldn't eat junk food at all. Maybe the government should restrict it entirely. But then we can enter into all sorts of questions about what counts as junk food. And maybe even the junkiest of junk food, right? Even the tricks like we see on the screen, or other sorts of food that are very high in sugar or processed foods. Maybe they're okay in moderation. These are ongoing debates in society. So um, maybe pause the video and think a little bit about yourself, about how you and your family would address this question. What counts as junk food? What should the family do to restrict it? What should the government do to restrict it? Okay, let's talk about food deserts. This map we're looking at right here is a map created by the USC Spatial Sciences Institute. There's a program at the USC Spatial Sciences Institute about um, about food and about nutrition, right? And they've created this map where each one of these colored areas, I believe, is a census tract. And they're color coded according to access to healthy foods. Um, we can think of a food desert as an area with limited access to affordable and nutritious food. So food deserts are places where they have a longer distance to get to a supermarket or some other store that sells fresh produce and other perishables. What we've seen, particularly in lots of lower middle income neighborhoods in U.S. cities, is that grocery stores withdraw. You can't find a Ralph's or a Safeway or a Whole Foods. And oftentimes in these same places where there used to be a grocery store, you'll see a 99-cent store, some other low price alternative, but many times these low price, the sorts of commercial establishments that you find in these low income areas do not have fresh fruits and vegetables. Maybe they have lots of packaged food and more processed foods. So you may think a little bit about what causes food deserts. On the one hand, we may think that this is an ordinary market behavior by the grocery stores. If you own a grocery store, you say, well, we're not going to put a grocery store in a neighborhood where we don't think we're going to be very profitable. There may be other issues as well, right? It may be that issues around zoning, that make it difficult to open a grocery store in certain areas, or that the poor quality of infrastructure, there's lack of security, poor lighting, bad roads, not enough parking, all sorts of issues that may make it so the grocery stores find it difficult to open up in these sorts of neighborhoods. I encourage you to click on the link um, where it says interactive map of LA, and you can find different neighborhoods of LA and explore the the incidence of healthy food establishments in each of those neighborhoods. Okay, so let's talk a little bit. I like to share a little bit of basic data about what I'm talking about when I'm talking about nutritional inequality, this big concept that's driving the course today. What we're looking at here are different differential rates of obesity among children and adolescents, so people 19 years and younger, differentiated um, by race, by class, and also by sex. So you can see all the graphs on the left correspond to boys, the graphs on the right correspond to girls. This is data from the United States. The data is about 20 years old. It goes back to about 2008, but I think the rates are quite similar today as well. Um, and in each case, we see the graphs, we see the data broken down by race. So you can see the top segment shows all the racial groups added together. The second group is non-Hispanic white. The third is non-Hispanic black. And the bottom group is Mexican American. I'm not sure why they chose these particular racial ethnic groups, why we don't have another Latino group that's not Mexican, for instance, or Asian American or Pacific Islander. But we can take this as a basic summary of the sorts of inequality that we want to talk about. One thing we see, even if you just look at the totals on the top, we see that in general, people who belong to a lower socioeconomic class tend to have much higher rates of obesity. Um, so each of these lines, the dark blue line, we can think of as the people who are the highest socioeconomic status. These are people where the head of the household, the parent in this household, has a college degree. And as we move down the line, we move to families where the head of the household has lesser and lesser education, right? So the light green line all the way on the bottom of each of these stacks of lines, the light green line corresponds to families where the head of the household has less than a high school degree, right? They haven't completed high school. So we can think of that as being sort of the lowest socioeconomic status. In this case, we're using educational attainment as a measure of class because it's sort of more, it's a more objective measure than looking at income-based measures. Another measure of class would be how much money, what income decile does your family fall in? But it gets really complicated when you look at income because in certain neighborhoods or in certain cities and certain parts of the country, the same income may put you in the upper class or the middle class or the lower class, having to do with cost of living. Also, in surveys, it's hard to get people to answer honestly about their income. So these researchers used this is the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, the U.S. government. Researchers used educational attainment as their measure of class. And what we see is for almost all of these groups, for boys, for girls, across different racial groups, people who are lower socioeconomic statuses, people whose head of household has less than a high school degree, have much higher rates of obesity, practically double, right? So for boys, about 21% of those families with less than high school are obese. Um, and about 12% of those where the head of household is a college graduate are obese. For girls, the difference is even more notable, right? Girls from higher class families, only about 8% are obese, whereas girls from the lower class families, about 20%, so like two and a half times um, are obese. And as you go down these below the totals, right, you see the numbers broken down by racial group. And one thing we can notice is that in general, obesity across all of these categories, obesity is higher among the Mexican American and uh, the black racial categories. So in general, what we can take from this is that the lower your socioeconomic status in the United States, the more likely you are to be obese, and that these differential rates of obesity are even more pronounced for typically marginalized ethnic and racial groups. This is sort of an interesting historical point to think about. You know, for the vast majority of human history, being poor meant having um, food insecurity or food insufficiency, right? It used to be up until quite recently, up until maybe 40 or 50 years ago, that poorer folks, even in the United States, had a hard time getting enough food to feed their family. Poorer people were skinnier, right? Being large, being overweight, being obese was associated with being wealthy and having access to luxurious fatty foods. We live in a strange time today, right, where wealthier people are more likely to be thinner than than lower income people. Lower income people in the United States are more likely to have obesity, which we can, which is a contested concept, but we can think of obesity as being sort of overweight in an unhealthy way. Okay, and just to bring a little bit more data, here we're looking at prevalence of diabetes according to different ethnic groups. So diabetes is sort of the most prominent disease associated with obesity. And here we're breaking it down into different racial and ethnic groups. The bars on the left are for Asian Americans. I'm sorry, American natives. Um, so indigenous populations in the United States. The second two bars are for Asians, men and women, Black, Hispanic, and white populations. And what we see is, according to these different racial and ethnic groups, we see much different rates of diabetes. Um, indigenous Native American populations, about 15% suffer from diabetes. Black and Hispanic, we see numbers around 12 and 13%. And for white and Asian populations, it's closer to 7, 8, 9%. Right? So really differential rates of diabetes. What we're seeing here is that our food system, our nutrition system, for people who belong to different social classes, for people who belong to different racial and ethnic groups, they have very different diets and it has important impacts on their health. Okay, so um, if we're concerned about this nutritional inequality, we can ask, what should we do? What could we do about it, right? And if we believe the typical supply side story, right, typical supply side story is that there's this issue of food deserts. Lower neighborhoods with where people from lower socioeconomic classes tend to live have less access to healthy food. And as a result, they eat more junk food. If we believe this, we could ask, what could the government do? What sorts of policy levers does the government have to try to shape, to try to get rid of food deserts, to make more healthy food available to lower income people, to Black, Hispanic, and other marginalized ethnic and racial groups? Could they eliminate McDonald's and other chains or otherwise regulate them in a way that would make their prices higher, make it so they have to serve healthier food, right? Tell McDonald's you have to serve salads as well as burgers. Could the government promote healthy alternatives? You could imagine subsidizing grocery stores or even forcing grocery stores to open up in these poor neighborhoods, right? The city of Los Angeles, I believe the city of Chicago has done this, right? Where the mayor of the city of Chicago has come to went to the big grocery store chains and said, look, if you want to operate in the wealthier neighborhoods of Chicago, you also have to open up in the lower income neighborhoods of Chicago. Some other policy ideas as a way of sort of making healthy food more available on the supply side have to do with community gardens, having these neighborhoods plant, setting aside spaces where the neighbors can plant fruits and vegetables. This is both an experiential thing where kids and families get an opportunity to participate in gardening, but also a supply side solution, right? It increases the amount of vegetables that are available, right? If these vegetables are then given away to members of the community. Um, you could also imagine policy approaches that target schools, right? Typically, children eat one and sometimes two meals every day, or at least Monday through Friday during the school year at school. And so, if we want to make sure these kids are eating healthier, that they're getting into healthier eating habits, we could try to introduce policies to make school lunches more healthy, to make it so the healthy options at school lunches are more appealing, right? If you're like me, you went to a public school where there were vegetables and salad available, um, but they weren't very appealing, right? It was just like iceberg lettuce, that sort of prepackaged salad in a plastic bag that they dumped. No one ate it, right? I ate the chicken nuggets and the French fries with ranch dressing and ketchup, and I didn't even want to touch that salad. I encourage you to click on these two links in these slides, and you can read about and you can watch a couple of videos about attempts to target schools as places to promote healthier eating on the supply side. There's a program by Jamie Oliver, the celebrity chef from England called Jamie Oliver, who um, I don't know how widespread it was, but he had a program pushing schools in England to have healthier school lunches. And then he tried to bring the same policy to the LA Unified School District with less success. So I'd encourage you to watch those two YouTube videos that are linked from these slides. Remember, you can always find a PDF version of these slides in the content section of the Brightspace page. Okay, so now let's get into the Taste of Inequality reading. This is an interesting reading. Most of the readings for this course are not particularly academic. Most of the readings that we have in this course are articles from journalistic articles or books written for a more popular audience. This one reading is an exception. I really like this article by Fielding Singh. She's a sociologist, and I think this article is readable. It's accessible for an undergraduate audience. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to really, Fielding Singh spends time with many families with adolescent children, and she's really trying to understand, using ethnographic methods, how they approach food, why these families from different socioeconomic groups feed their children differently, right? And she doesn't do it just by looking at quantitative statistics and data. She analyzes this by actually observing how these families operate. She embeds herself in these families, right? And she interviews the parents and the kids. So her research questions in this article are first, how do individuals across the socioeconomic spectrum assign symbolic value to food? Okay, there's that important concept for her, symbolic value. What food means to them. What sorts of values, what sorts of things are they thinking about when they're feeding their kids? And then how does that symbolic value, how do these different meanings of food shape their dietary choices? So she's sort of arguing against these previous explanations. The previous explanation was structural. When we think about structural issues, structural variables or structural explanations are explanations that have to do with social class, with pure economic logic. And the sort of naive structural explanation would be that poorer people, lower income people, have less income and they have less knowledge, right? They have less income, so maybe we might think, oh, because they have less money, they have less income, they can't afford healthy food. Or maybe they have less knowledge, right? Because they're not as knowledgeable, because they don't understand science. Maybe they don't know the difference between healthy food and unhealthy food. Maybe they don't realize how bad it is for them to eat junk food and to drink soda all the time. Fielding Singh sort of she disagrees with both of these structural arguments. On the income-based side, she says, well, it's actually often is affordable and is accessible. Often, even low-income families can find fresh fruits and vegetables. In fact, there are government programs in many cities where they give away boxes of fresh fruits and vegetables. Many times people do have a grocery store with fruits and vegetables, with fresh, healthy food that's accessible that people could find. Furthermore, on the knowledge side, most people know the difference between healthy food and unhealthy food. Most people, even people who haven't completed high school, they're able to read a nutrition label. They know when they're drinking sugary drinks and when they're eating processed foods and fast foods. They know that that's not as healthy as food that features whole grains and fresh fruits and vegetables. Um, so she says these structural explanations, these differences in income and knowledge may explain part of the story. They may get us part of the way to understanding nutritional inequality, but they don't go very far. Instead, she turns to this argument of symbolic value. And the way she develops this argument, so the way she conducts this analysis, is through interviews and ethnographic observation. Okay, so these are the same methods you're going to use when you write your ethnographic case study as the final paper for this class. She spent a long time conducting in-depth interviews of 160 parents and adolescents. So many different families. She talked to the parents, she talked to the kids. These are sort of teenage kids. She chose adolescents for a particular reason, right? I think it's because they're sort of she didn't want to talk to very young kids who maybe aren't old enough to really understand very much about nutrition. She wanted to talk to kids that were old enough that they can reflect a little bit on what the dietary choices that their parents were making for them. And then she conducted ethnographic observation of four families. She found four families, different socioeconomic statuses, different racial groups. And she embedded herself in these families. She spent many hours um, hanging out with these families. She'd sit in the car with them when the moms and dads picked up their kids from school. She'd hang out at the house when they were making dinner. She didn't tell them that she was there to observe their diets. She said she was there for sort of more vague reasons. She said she told them she was a researcher conducting this ethnographic research, but she didn't necessarily say, "I'm here to figure out what you eat and why and how you talk about what you eat." Um, and what this ethnographic research allowed her to do is it allowed her to really see in an unbiased way the ways these families eat, right? If you ask people, "Oh, what do you feed your kids and why?" They may lie, or to be more generous, they may have a selective memory and they say, "Oh, we eat lots of vegetables," right? The fact that she was there watching it allowed her to really observe what these kids were eating and what these parents were eating. And even more importantly than that, she was able to observe how they talked about what they were eating. When the kids asked for an ice cream, what did the parents say and why? Right? So the evidence that she brings to the table to make this argument about symbolic value comes from these interviews with the parents and their kids and these ethnographic observations that she conducted with these families. And her main finding is that a really important explanation for nutritional inequality is the symbolic value of food, which she defines as the symbolic meaning attached to food. This is an explanation on the demand side, right? I've been talking about the supply side and the demand side. She says, I'm not, her concern here isn't about food deserts, isn't about the inability of low-income families to find healthy food. That's not her explanation. Her explanation is about why lower income families, why families who have a lower socioeconomic status, here on this slide, I abbreviate it as SES. Why these lower income families actually seek out, why they demand, what even if they have access to healthier food, and even if they know that it's healthier, why they still give their kids junk food. And for the symbolic value, she describes it, she summarizes it for these lower income families as that food serves as an antidote to a context of deprivation. Here, the family was the Bakers. She uses pseudonyms for these for a couple of different families, the Bakers and the Canes. So for the Bakers, for this lower income family, they indulge their kids with junk food, with the kind of food that kids are asking for, cookies and candies and sodas and Happy Meals, as a way to compensate for scarcity in other domains, right? These parents are very busy. They don't have a lot of money. They can't send their kids to fancy summer camps, go to amusement parks, or buy them all the video games and toys that they want. So they compensate by giving them these treats on a daily basis, right? They're obliging their children. They're making themselves feel better as parents by making their kids happy and buying them treats. On the other hand, the Canes, the higher, you can think of as sort of an upper middle class family, um, they think of food very differently. For them, the symbolic value of food is a venue for parents to act as caregivers. We're trying to help our kids develop healthy habits. We're teaching them discipline, the ability to stick to a healthy diet. If you're interested um, in this concept of this view of parenthood, right, where parents' job is to teach restraint, to teach delayed gratification, people who are successful, people who do well in life, people who get good grades and get good jobs, these are the sorts of people who are able to resist the temptation to make the easy choice, and instead make the wiser choice, right? You'd rather watch TV, but turn off the TV and do your homework. I encourage you all to look on YouTube for a video of the marshmallow test. There's a famous study done in the field of education called the marshmallow test. Maybe you've heard of it, right? And this is an expression of this, right, where they test all these different kids on their ability to show restraint to not eat a marshmallow, and they find that this skill, this um, this skill or this aptitude or this tendency to be more disciplined, to be able to restrain one's impulses to make that unhealthy choice. For many families, this is associated with having a successful life, right? So, in general, Fielding Sing's finding is that for these families, food just means really different things. These parents, um, when they're thinking about food and how they feed their kids, they're responding to really different impulses, to really different sets of interests. And that explains why the lower socioeconomic status families will seek out, um, will demand, will try to find food that's going to make their kids happy, even though they know it's less healthy. Okay, so if we believe Fielding Sing, um, food deserts, if just getting rid of food deserts won't be enough. If we're trying to solve the issue of nutritional inequality, we won't get very far just by opening up grocery stores or even just by giving away um, fruits and vegetables in low-income families. What we actually need to do is to do some sort of intervention on the demand side. We need to somehow get these lower income families to seek out healthier food, right? To see the merit in feeding their kids um, healthier options, or alternatively, to get the kids themselves to be interested in eating healthy food. Does that sound plausible? Do you think we could get to a situation where kids are asking for carrot sticks instead of ice cream cones? Not my kids, maybe some kids in some countries. I'd encourage you to watch the video. Click on the link in this slide where it says maybe the problem isn't access to food, but food preferences. This is a link to another video. In this case, the video summarizes a study done by economists at the University of Chicago, a really data-based analysis that finds results that I think align really well with Fielding Sing, right? They did this big study around analyzing the openings and closures of grocery stores and seeing how it changed the consumption habits. And they find that it changes the consumption habits of low-income American food consumers very little, practically none at all. So again, that's a study that these economists did, and they find that most of the issue around nutritional inequality isn't about supply. It's not about food deserts. It's mostly about demand. It's mostly about the different sorts of consumption choices that these families make. So that raises these really difficult questions. Where do these preferences come from? And what can be done to create demand for healthy foods, right? And these are the sorts of questions um, I want you to be thinking about um, when you write your reflection posts about nutritional inequality. Over the course of the rest of this course, right, we're thinking about what food means in terms of culture and identity, right? And why do we, as food consumers, why do we make the choices that we make? Okay, if you want, you can click on this link. This link takes you to a short video from a food cooking show where they try to, I can't remember what it's called, Gourmet Makes or something, where they're trying to replicate certain packaged foods in like a gourmet kitchen. In this case, it's a chef trying to make a gourmet version of a Hot Pocket.